Welcome to the Our State Book Club podcast. I'm your host, New York Times bestselling author and North Carolina native Wiley Cash. In today's episode, we travel southeast to Wilmington to talk with Clyde Edgerton about his life's work as a writer, musician, artist, pilot, professor, and Papa Daddy. I can't think of another North Carolina writer who wears so many identities so well. Clyde, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wally. It's good to be here. Thank you for doing this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. I mean, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than talk to my friends about writing, and then somebody pays me to do it. So here we are. A lot of our listeners and our viewers know you primarily as an author of books like Rainy and Walking Across Egypt. But as I mentioned in the introduction, you've done a lot of things, and you still continue to pursue other avenues of expression. So how did you acquire all these skills? Did you grow up thinking there are so many things I want to do? I want to be a painter, a pilot, a writer, a musician, or did you just acquire all of these by way of making your way towards something else?
And these aren't planned questions, I should say.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to ask. I think I've been very, very lucky. I've had a very lucky life in a lot of ways. And it started in some ways with being an only child. I was born in 1949. I will not go into the whole story, but I was an only child, and my mother was, in a way, ambitious for me.
Mm-hmm.
And she cleaned houses and was not allowed to touch a piano when she was a child, 12 years old, with her mother. And she kind of put that on me. So when I was 4 years old, we'd be in the front yard looking up at the stars on a blanket. And I'm 4, and she'd say, when you get to be 7 in 3 years, you can play the piano. You can take piano lessons. So by the time I was 5, I was going crazy to play the piano. So then I started taking piano. She started taking piano at age 47. So that was the music, and I didn't take long because I happened to be coming along when there was some really neat rock and roll. So I got a rock and roll band. I started picking up stuff by ear. That was the music. And then in high school, I saw these films, and behind me at my age were 2 wars, mainly 1 and 2. Korea was there, but 1 and 2 were big. So it was a big in a way that America did something. In my subculture, it was a big deal. So when I saw these films on TV late at night of a pilot flying an airplane and doing aileron rolls, and the poem High Flight was being played, and there was an American flag and all, I said, I got to do that. So that stuck with me. So when I went to college, ROTC, I got to fly. When I was 19, I read A Farewell to Arms, and it seemed like it was alive. In the 10th grade, I'd read Emerson, and no books in our house except the Bible and Boy's Life. Mm-hmm. But Emerson, somehow Emerson's essays grabbed me.
Really?
It made
That's
me
so
interested in literature. And that, again, it's the 10th grade, and that little 10th grade book. So that then in college, when I read Farewell to Arms, I decided I wanted to teach English at the high school level. And I couldn't dream of being a writer. Yeah. But I wanted to teach English. So Hemingway, Twain, Crane, and other people like that. And then so I got my 5 years flying, came back in graduate school, took a course with the first black professor hired by the UNC system, Blyden Jackson, and African-American, wasn't sure it was called, and read Richard Wright, Native Son. So then only in 2007 did I wanted to paint a grill of a Chrysler, because I had a character who wanted a Chrysler. My daddy always wanted a Chrysler. So I found a grill in an old magazine, 1950 magazine, and with acrylics painted this Chrysler grill, and it was fun. And so I've been painting since. So I think that covers pretty much what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to go back to becoming a writer. What were some of the earliest impulses? You said Hemingway made you want to teach literature, but who were the writers that made you want to try it?
We did a Reader's Theater while I lived at the PO. We started doing them over and over, and I was all the people. I was all the characters. The people who haven't read it got to read it. And it wasn't about flying airplanes. It wasn't about fighting in a war or Farewell to Arms. It wasn't about any of these things. It was about a family, not unlike families I'd grown up in and the houses I'd been in, and they were talking to each other, and it was literature, and it was funny, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know who this Eudora Welty was until May 14th, 1978. I turned on PBS, and there she is reading Why I Live at the PO. And I went to my journal. I was keeping a journal. I said, tomorrow I want to start being a fiction writer. And I did.
Yeah.
And I had one story behind me that I had written. So that's kind of, I got really inspired by writers.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had these storytellers in my family that I didn't even realize it was magical.
Yeah.
That reminds me, a quote popped in my head. Harry Crews said, "Guilt is magic." Now, there may have been some guilt in my family here and there, or one place to the other, but back to the storytelling. So I was used to hearing stories, and when I wrote my first short story, and there's somebody falling through the well in my own kitchen, and I didn't have to make any of this up. It was like I was transferring to real people, but they were magically fictional. And the whole family comes running in. There's my Uncle Alfred, and who speaks with a lisp. I heard that all my life. There he is, looking down in the well, and saying, "Where are you?" And that was kind of magical, because I could write about a real place. And people, and my Uncle Alfred died before I was born, but I'd heard so many stories about it, and he was one of my favorite uncles.
Yeah.
So I was able to make him into a character, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then things started happening that I realized I could tell a story about it. It was that simple, telling the story.
Yeah. So, a lot of that, I think most of that in the late 70s happened while you were teaching at Campbell. But then you came over to UNC Wilmington at some point. You spent 25 years at UNC Wilmington. And you just retired last year, I believe. This is your first full year out of the classroom. Coming up, I guess we just had graduation. How did spending so much time in the classroom affect your approach to writing your own work? We've heard about how these other writers, Welty, O'Connor, affected your writing. How did working with your students affect your writing?
It pretty much ruined it. I couldn't think when I was writing anymore. I'm thinking about what I was supposed to do rather than what I needed to do. That's not true. I'm trying to be funny. It didn't ruin it at all. Maybe a little bit here and now. It made me focus on certain lessons. I was continuously reminding myself of what I needed to hear to keep me on track.
Sure.
I think in writing a novel in the way you should.
Yeah, because you say these things to students and you think, well, I should do that.
I know.
And I love what you just said about packaging these small lessons about here's how you write dialogue that turns the emotion of the dialogue. And then when you're working on your own dialogue, maybe you'll remember what you were talking about, what you said. And obviously, you learned it from somebody else. You learned it from reading, from writing.
Let me say this while I'm thinking of these little things. Josephine Humphreys, a South Carolina writer. There's so many. Jill Lee, Tim McLaurin, Larry Brown, and people I've known and have been able to read their work and think about what they were doing. And it's helpful to know them personally.
Sure, yeah.
In many kind of strange ways, maybe. But Josephine Humphreys said, and this definition of a novel has helped me, a novel is a series of scenes with meaning, period. And that whole meaning word and that whole experience word, like you're writing from your own experience, and meaning are words that help me stay away from messaging. But many writers write to be a messenger, and I think we all probably do subconsciously, unconsciously, but I try to avoid doing that, obviously, just because it's what I'm attracted to as a writer. It's okay to do that. When writers do that, they write message novels. That's fine. But I always tell fiction writers, if you want to write messages, be a preacher or an essayist. If you want to write fiction, you do something different.
Recently, I had some students, or I had a writer I very much admire, a guy named S.A. Cosby, who's a black writer from kind of Tidewater, Eastern Virginia. And he's had a lot of success in the past 3 or 4 years with these noir mystery novels. He said, you should never write to send messages or settle scores. You have to write for a different reason.
Yeah.
And it's funny you're mentioning Jill and Lee and Doris Betts. These are names that so often come up when I'm having these conversations with other North Carolina writers. And even I was talking with Georgianne Eubanks last week, and she mentioned Josephine Humphreys.
Right.
How they're just kind of in the zeitgeist of where we're all living as North Carolina writers or Southern writers. We're just kind of conjuring all these lessons that we've learned and all these things that we've heard, and we get to live in it. It's pretty phenomenal. We'll be right back with Clyde Edgerton after this break.
This podcast is produced by Our State Magazine, celebrating North Carolina travel, food, history, and culture since 1933. Check out ourstate.com, where you can explore exclusive content like digital stories, YouTube videos, newsletters, and more. To have each month's issue delivered to your mailbox, visit ourstate.com/subscribe and enter promo code BOOKCLUB, one word, Book Club. That's BOOKCLUB for $5 off any regular or gift subscription.
All right, we're back with Clyde Edgerton. So, Clyde, I know a lot of writers, myself included, who enter the classroom after being successful writers. Then you get opportunities to do other things, write. You get opportunities to teach and travel around and give talks and write magazine articles. And all of that success means you don't have a lot of time to write the stuff that has made you successful. And you spent 25 years on the faculty at UNC Wilmington. And what I admire so much about the faculty there, the late Philip Gerard, David Gessner, Nina DeGramont, Jason Mott, people there have always managed to publish, the poets as well. How do you manage to publish? You wrote several novels and Papa Daddy's book for New Fathers. You've published a lot while teaching. How have you done it?
Well, I think that Flannery O'Connor said you sit in front of your machine 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have anything to write.
Yeah.
So when it's working for me, I'm working in the mornings, 2 hours, maybe 3, before my day starts.
Yeah.
And I'm alone, and I'm with the characters and the scenes in the novel. And again, if it's working, it doesn't always work. If it's working, that's where I really want to be tomorrow, because something's going on. I want to find out what's happening.
Yeah.
And so when I'm lucky, that's the way it works. I just make myself have the time early in the morning as a routine. And I need to be in the same place. And usually if I start writing a novel in this chair, I come back to it, and there's something in the air around the chair that's going to help me not be distracted. And so that's the other thing I've learned. Hemingway used to sharpen 14 pencils, supposedly, before he started writing. And when I started writing, I thought that would help me be a good writer, and so I would sharpen 14 pencils. But it really found out it doesn't quite work.
Then you just got a bunch of six-fingered cats, and we're like, now I'll get it done.
Yeah, the cats. Oh gosh, I think about people in their professions admiring someone who normally has gone before them, and it's a meaningful thing. And now I think about, with some perspective, looking back, there was something when I started out that I thought everybody had to be interested in literature, in stories, and reading stories, and many people aren't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I feel again lucky to have had these writers that I just love to read and see what they were doing. And I didn't find success in I tried to write like them, but I found out that that's okay for a while to try that, but you're going to get into your own, find out what gives you pleasure for yourself.
Yeah.
As an audience, which I think is important too, to always think of what you like and dislike as what your audience likes and dislikes. Mm-hmm. I think maybe it's dangerous to try to figure out or listen to an agent or an editor who says, "Here's who we are writing for." You're writing for yourself, for what you like, what you enjoy, and it's going to be different. And anyway,
you got to write what you want to have the experience doing, because it takes a long time. Yeah. And writers like us are teaching and writing and traveling and doing other things. And we've got to feel some kind of curiosity or mystery drawing us back to the desk. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. If I know all the answers, it's not going to interest me very much, And what you said about reading Hemingway and trying to do that, I always tell young writers who are really influenced, I don't know what your experience has been like, but there was a time where for about 5 years, every male writer between the age of like 25 and 35 tried to be Cormac McCarthy. And it was crippling to many of them. And I would tell them, it's good to write under the influence of a writer, but find your way out from under that influence as soon as you can, and take the things that you learned with you, but then find yourself. And I say, it's like one day you're going to change the way you walk, but then after about 2 weeks, you're going to go back to walking the way you've always walked. That's what writing under the influence is like for me. You take these things that maybe worked, that maybe you like, but then you just kind of still do it. Every book that I begin, I'm like, I'm going to write this one like so-and-so. And then I end up writing the same old book that I always write. It's not like theirs at all, because you kind of write your way into how you always do it.
Right.
So, and then other thing, I don't want to embarrass you, but you talked about reading writers like Hemingway and the others and being influenced by them. But by the time you came around, those writers were gone. The Fitzgeralds and the Hemingways and the Woolfs and the O'Connors, they were gone. But I read, you, George Singleton, Lee, Jill, Ernest Gaines, Randall Keenan, and y'all are still here, and yeah. I know so many of you. And so I feel like we've got this kind of generational convergence that is uncommon in North Carolina. I mean, Gaines is not a North Carolina writer, neither is George Singleton, despite how bad he probably wants to be. But we have this convergence in North Carolina. You mentioned Ashley Bryant Phillips, one of your former students, who's an exceptional fiction writer and is still very much working. So I feel very lucky. So I said at the top that a lot of people know you primarily as a writer, but you're also a very active painter and a very good painter. Do you think about rendering images? You talked about painting the Chrysler Grill. Do you think about rendering images on the canvas in the same way you think about rendering images on the page?
I think there are similarities. I think, for example, you're probably shooting for something that catches the eye, some focal point.
Sure.
Now, and in writing, it's a little bit like, and once you decide what you want the viewer to see, that's the main thing you want to think about. And it might be by messing it up a little bit is what draws it in. It might be by getting it accurate. But I think the focal point and the way that connects to writers and writing is that I think when you start a novel, you need to ask what it's about. And it might be about loss. Let's say a mother ran over a little girl's kitten. You can make that about loss, but you can make it about guilt. Mm-hmm. Which one you make it about determines the sentences that you use and who says what.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
So what it's about is the focal point in painting. And it doesn't mean you don't spend time on other stuff, but you spend time so that the person is going to be focused mainly on one thing. There's all kinds of painting that doesn't do that. Some abstractions. And I think in writing fiction, to think what it's about, especially a novel, and start your novel, and it might change in what it's about. Yeah. It might become about something else. But the answer to that question is, and I like to think about it in one word, maybe a word in a sentence: loss, loyalty, betrayal. What that word will tell you when you're halfway through the novel or finished with the novel is what to take out. Mm. And maybe what to add and what to leave in. So it's more about betrayal than it is about loss.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of combination I sort of feel.
Yeah. There's a lesson there and the story of the cat being run over. It can be about loss, which is the absence of something, or it can be about guilt, which is the active participation in something. And a lot of, I think, beginning writers would choose loss because they think it's momentous and profound, but guilt is so much more interesting.
I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. And I'm sure many people have said it, but Harry Crews, somewhere I've read where he said guilt is magic. When I read that, I thought, guilt is magic. Ooh. See, it can be, there's much this magic in the world, but one thing is guilt that we don't think of as magic.
Well, speaking of Harry Crews, I don't know if you'll mention him here, but to close this out, you know, of all the Southern writers that I read about in preparing to write these pieces in the magazine and also preparing for the interviews, you and maybe Alan Gurganis are compared a lot to other writers, previous writers, whether it's Twain, Faulkner, O'Connor, Welty. So who are 5 Southern writers who have really influenced you, despite whoever you're compared to? But who are 5 that have really influenced you and why?
Well, clearly adore Welty, and Flannery O'Connor, and Faulkner, who I'm into more now than ever. And what set me off understanding the South better than I had would be Richard Wright in Native Son. And that's 4. Well, then I've got my friends, a lot of Southern writer friends. I could group them all together and call them something and say they've influenced me. I can't help but think about, if we're talking about people who aren't alive, Larry Brown was a good friend and a powerful writer.
Yeah.
And so those are 5 names, but I could give 5 more probably.
Well, Clyde, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this with us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
What might it be like underneath the sunrise in a state of flight? Coming back on me, it seems wonderful, the wandering mountain birds on a beach. Never moments ever wasted, turning away from your love. Honeybees, gardens of sweeter fruit never tasted, no turning to other things. Will you be, will you seem? Sweeter fruit never tasted, don't turn your back.